Hey gang, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew, talking today about using random encounters, because I think that they really help you establish your sandbox homebrewed world as something that's real, where events are occurring off camera or off stage, as it were, from what the players are doing. It helps you set a narrative tone, distinguishing your world from that of a campaign setting or adventure path or something like that. And finally, it also, I think, really helps your narrative skills. You're forced on the fly to come up with an encounter right there at the table. And then it gives you the opportunity to integrate that encounter into your world, after the session. And I think sometimes people, when they think of a random encounter, first of all, they think of random monster or wandering monster, right? Because the charts, at least in the D&D world, the progression, the charts that used to be used to generate a wandering monster, as it were, just showed you a list of monsters. And people will sometimes say, oh, well, that's from the dungeon days, like an ooze or a carrion crawler. They would wander through the dungeon. They lived in the dungeon. So the randomness was just where the players were and they were. And that was, the abstraction was a role. But you shouldn't have random monsters, say, out in the wilderness. And this is why a random encounter, to me, works much better as a term, because it represents other things than just a list of monsters. If a party is walking through woods and they suddenly come to a clearing, and at the center of this clearing is this giant stone obelisk, that's an encounter. They're going to investigate that. They're going to see what's happening here. Who built this? Can we figure out what's going on? Well, is it magical? Is there something that's going to happen when we get close to this? All those kind of things, they're going to have, their radar is going to be on. And I think this is at the core sometimes of why people don't want to use random encounters, because they feel like they're a time sink in terms of you're in the game and now suddenly roll this list and you have this monster and the GM has to sit there and come up with their stats and all this while the players are just at the table looking on, right? They want to keep the game flowing. The other thing is a lot of people will say, oh, the narrative flow of my game, we've got these storylines, backgrounds, and why am I putting something randomly into that? I just want to keep the story going. But having played in games where there are no random encounters, where literally you just go from point A to point B, and anything you meet along the way has been prescribed. Either the GM has set it up in advance or it's in the adventure path or whatever, which, by the way, a lot of those will tell you, here's some ideas for random encounters. But you don't have that in those worlds. Again, the time sink, they interrupt the flow, all that stuff. Well, as a player, I'm constantly like, what is going on in this world? All we ever do is we sail from this city to the next and go to the dungeon, or we go to this area we're supposed to fight something or discover something. I'm never seeing the world exist. Because as I go through the world in real life, if you take a trip somewhere and you stop along the way or visit, you have random encounters all along the way. You see things you didn't expect. You had to take a detour here, which, by the way, is a random encounter. The road's closed, landslide, you got to go this way. Those are the kind of events that can occur to change the trip. So another answer to this, if you want random encounters, people will say, okay, but I'm going to have mine all set up in advance, right? I'm going to do the classic division of these, which is by environment, right? So I've got random monsters set, let's say 10. For forest, for desert, for mountains, for Arctic, whatever it is. When the group is traveling through that sort of area, I have this list. So when they're traveling through your world, like in mine, I use 6 mile hexes. 1 or 2 out of 6, they get a random encounter. And then I just go down my list and maybe I randomize that. Well, first of all, that takes a lot of time, because I actually used to do this. Because when I was younger, a kid basically, coming up, I would just make encounters all the time because I enjoyed doing that. And so, that avoids the time sink because it was all prepared. The issue was it tended not to become truly random. Like, say the group is going through a desert and I got a random encounter and I roll bandits. Well, you start to think, where would bandits probably encounter a group? Where would they be lurking? Like the caravan trail that goes through the desert or at an oasis? But the group is out in this hex, totally barren. They're looking for some lost city or something, and so they're in this totally remote area of the desert. Would bandits be sort of lurking there? Well, maybe they've heard about the lost city. It's not going to be very fruitful, though, because bandits have to keep the hoppers going, right? They got to keep robbing people. So they're going to go where the people are. So your tendency is to say, oh, bandit, no, that's no good because they wouldn't be in that. Okay, here we go. Salamander or, whatever it is, a desert type encounter, blue dragon flies over. You're looking at my lost city. You create the storyline because you've got these pre-made encounters. It's not truly random. And that might be okay. The other element is you're going to have random encounters and you got to keep that going. You got to keep that list going because you start to just run out and you don't want to repeat yourself. So if you've got the time to prepare random encounters, good for you. I used to do it. I stopped doing it and started using just lists. One, because I didn't want to spend all that time doing it. But two, I found that what that did was help me work my narrative skills to create something on the fly. And I also realized, looking at lists, these lists are not very good because they're just lists of monsters. If you look at the one current 5e, they've got the ones in Xanathars. And you'll see that, like, let's say you're going through Forest, a group 5 to 10th level. There's like 4 non-monster encounters. And the rest just list, monsters. How many might appear. Kind of randomize it. Some do and some don't. Well, that lends itself to the issue that people have with, I'm just having a battle here. I'm just wasting time. I'm spending time on something instead of getting to the story, instead of completing my narrative, right? And I would say you could still have those kind of battles. You can just have monsters rolled up. And again, include them in the narrative afterwards if you want. But really you want to think about kind of outside this box of these tables, which started right from the beginning, and think about non-combat type encounters, or think about humanoid encounters, a caravan, let's say, that is lost or just moving along, a group of, cultists, or they don't have to be evil cultists, right? A lost traveler, something like that. You want to mix it up. You don't just want to say, okay, 12 skeletons, roll initiative, because that is a time sink, and you're over there figuring out all their hit points and stuff. That's just the sort of thing that have given random encounters a bad name. So what it comes down to then, if you're going to use random encounters and you're going to use lists to randomize this process of picking the random encounter, you want to make sure your list is okay. And as I've said, I found the ones in a lot of the published, whatever setting that you're playing, they tend towards monsters. They tend towards combat. But you can find online, there's all sorts of resources to get lists of random encounters that are not combat oriented. And you can take those and sort of create your own list. Again, they're divided typically by environment, whether it's forest, mountains, or the plain of limbo or something. The other thing that you can do is you can use an AI tool like ChatGPT. I have done this. I have used this to create lists for my own random encounters. Now, what you'll find with ChatGPT is when you start to play with it, you got to really massage the data. You start asking it, give me a list of 100 possible random encounters in a D&D setting, let's say, and it just gives you a list. It doesn't give you percentages. So then you got to say, well, make a percentages. Then you got to say, base the percentages on the challenge rating, because otherwise you get, 0 through 5, 5 skeletons, 6 through 10, blue dragon, right? So you got to base it on challenge levels and all sorts of stuff. You got to massage the data. It doesn't just do the thinking for you. But I have established lists that way because what I'm going for is I'm trying to say, how much is going to be a non-combat encounter versus a monster. So as I've said before, I tend to divide my hexes. Not only is this going to be geography-based, because, right, a Remorhaz is going to appear in an Arctic environment, a Gorillion in a jungle environment, and so on, a crocodile in a swamp or some water environment. But also I do this by area of deadliness. So you have civilized areas, you have the border areas between the civilized and the true wilderness, the true deadly areas. This will determine how often you get a random encounter and what sort of encounter table or list it's going to be on. So a civilized area, I might say, every time you go down, you're going down a road and you might get a random encounter, one out of 6. It's not very often. Or because they're not true random encounters, they're just merchants going by in a caravan, and you're in one, or people are moving back and forth. And these aren't truly random encounters. You just expect this, like people on a highway, right? The random encounter is something bizarre that happens along the way on the highway, or out of the ordinary. And for the border areas, it might be 1 or 2 out of 6, kind of a standard roll. And then for really tough areas, you know, deadly zone, my old Swamp of Infinite Evil example, 1 through 3 out of 6. And then you just take that and you say, in a civilized area, 1 through 3 is just going to be humanoids. 4 and 5 would be a non-combat sort of situation. And then 6 would be a monster because they're unusual. And just adjust that. Then you get a 5 or 6 monster and you lower this. I always have it about 33 or even a half chance of a non-combat because I like those. I think those mix up the random encounters better, but you can do what you want. Deadly areas, yeah, you're going to have more monsters out there. Now, as I've said, I like to be, it doesn't bother me to be at the table creating an encounter, rolling, oh, they have an encounter. What is it? Okay, how do I do this right at the table? But I have resources there, right? I have a computer typically that I set up either behind the screen at some settings. You know, I've got that resource, so if I roll that random, I can look up this monster, quickly get its stats, and then I just think about what it might be doing. Or if I have a non-combat encounter and I roll up something, I can just integrate the players, walk up to that, and part of the encounter is creating this encounter is the players encountering it. You see the obelisk before you, what do you do? So now we're in. And I might decide at that point that all this is going to have is carvings on it that are going to relate to something that they're going to just figure out later. Or I'm going to connect it to something right away. Oh, this is the ancient Illyrith race, you know, that's kind of a mainstay of my current campaign. And this will give them some information. And if they have, at that point in their group, they understand the Illyrith language and they can read it, or they have comprehend languages and that kind of thing, it will say something like, here lies this was a site of some famous battle. It could be as simple as that. But could there be something buried under there? Is there a crypt, right? And then do the players start to investigate that? Do you have a crypt set up for that? Right? And if you don't, maybe you have a seal on there that they can't get through. They need some magic item. They can't dispel it. However you want to do this, that is interesting to the players, to have found this obelisk, to have discovered that others have gone by, travelers. Other people have seen it. You could even have the remains of some campsite. Somebody, you know, was clearly there investigating this. But the players are the first maybe to, first of all, they know the secret language of the Illyrith, the ancient language. Only a few people know that. And they're the ones that took the time to actually investigate and realize there's a crypt there. And that's the role-playing game environment, right? The players are the protagonists and antagonists of the world. So I generated some charts in ChatGPT just for this video. I didn't want to go, you know, the whole elaborate process of massaging these. You do have to do it. So it may be better for you just to go out there and find some lists. Search for random monster lists. But I just did this because I like to look at them, generate them, look at them, generate them, and get them to where I want. So if we look at the list that I made for, I did this for the Arctic environment just because it was the first thing that with I guess. So if we look at this, the standard list that comes up is a monster list. And these percentages are not based on anything with challenge rating. That you can go in and make those if you want. But it just gives you some ideas. A frost hag, a frost drake, a snow leopard, which is just sort of an animal encounter, which can be kind of fun. That's your standard sort of monster list. Then I want a list of non-combat encounters. So it comes up with them. An ice storm occurs, a weather event, that's an encounter. The weather changes really significantly. We're in trouble. We have to get shelter. A lost traveler. Now, I threw polar bear in there, which is interesting, but I did another list here. You have things like an abandoned expedition, frozen ruins, frozen echo chamber, which is like a huge cave in which your voice echoes through. And this echo chamber could have been some place, a perfect, cave formation where the voice echoed in such a way it was used by ancient religious rites, indigenous people or something, for some, religious elements, and there's something in there that they've buried or whatever, or it's just an interesting phenomenon, right? That things have gone on in this place when the players weren't there in the ancient past and are going on today. The other thing you can do with ChatGPT is you can take each of these things and say, give me a better idea what this is. And it gives you, you'll discover when you use something like this, it gives you a very ChatGPT-ish explanation that you may not find satisfying. And you may ask it more questions. But again, you can find these all over the place on the internet if you don't want to use AI. I just find it interesting because I can just think of an idea and then get a little help. I never really use the text. I always rewrite it. I'm just not the voice of ChatGPT. It doesn't interest me as much. But what you're doing here is you're taking the concept of a random encounter isn't just, here's a bunch of monsters, let's fight it. But it's showing the players that this world is going on out there, that there's things happening all over. Just like you discover when you take a journey, you take a trip across the country. You have random encounters with things you hadn't expected. Even if you're going, I'm going to go to Niagara Falls, and then I'm going to go to the Great Lakes, and I'm going to go here or there. You're going to have random encounters along the way. And then as a GM, that flexing that narrative muscle of thinking about, okay, I've got to incorporate this. And I just enjoy that. Part of it is I don't want to spend the time to make all these encounters in advance. I think it's really helpful for you as a GM to be able to just sit there at your thing and you've got your computer or your phone or you've got your notes and this comes up. If you really want to use the books or whatever, again, you get those books out, it starts to get tedious for the players because they're sitting there. But you come up with something and it really does make your world much richer, more thematically interesting, and I think ultimately funner. So hopefully that helps you. If you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel. Always looking for more. Leave some comments. Love to hear what you think about random encounters. Maybe you say, I don't use them, but I like to hear opposing views. I have some of my most interesting back and forth discussions. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.